that happened to him were a few spots in his eyes, an oddly comfortable warmth. That was it. The voice of the young warrior, with the black stripe across his face, came through the comlink. I know this calls for blood, but I was expecting something more. Leave as many alive as you can. Mesko answered, with the authority of a seasoned military commander. They're gonna have a lot of cleanup work to do after we're done with them. We're over Red Lake, Mick announced to the other pilots as the shields began to fade to reveal the earth below. This is Ojibwe land. But the fucking Pinkertons bought it all out and forced them off after the tribes were disbanded. Wait! Wait! The rainbow-eyed woman's voice called out. I'm from a community named that? Ojibwe, where food grows on water. It's one of our major communities in Skegpiwin. It's the name of one of the tribes here. The Martian began explaining quickly as the sky below him began to light up with more conventional anti-air systems. The Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi were members of the Three Fires Council, and they lived here back before colonization and their land got stolen. In that case, definitely leave some alive. Mensko suddenly had a calm rage in his voice that was almost scary. They have a lot of restoration work to do before we can give your cousins their land back. The roar of war cries that erupted through the comlink was so ferocious that Mick was compelled to join in and give his own barking reply. What was once like a bad old movie suddenly became a sound Mick felt in his soul. Less than 5 minutes had passed between the sensation of floating in space and the team transitioning their re-entry into the lower atmosphere above their target. The rage-filled masses of metal passed cleanly through the clouds of chaff, were gently nudged by the explosions of missiles detonating against the active shielding, and casually watched as railgun slugs turned to vapor before even coming close to the armor of the suits. Though the standard shielding on the BD series mechs most of the pilots were used to were good, the dramatically overpowered arrays on Mick's mechs were unparalleled. When a timer showing the estimated time until landing appeared on all of their HUDs, a calm silence fell across the comlink. Despite the defenders throwing everything they had at their encroaching doom. There was nothing that could be done to stop it. Within 6 minutes of being ejected from the assault cruiser, and before their target had even come close to expending all of the anti-air munitions, the mech team was on the ground and wreaking havoc. When they came home, a personal statement by Johann Gensberg, former Pinkerton security officer, survivor of the Battle of Red Lake, and currently serving a 7-month sentence under the supervision of the Nishnaybe Confederacy militia. When I tell you I knew exactly what I was doing when I signed up with the Pinkertons, I want you to know I'm not lying. I knew I would be violently enforcing the will of some rich bastards that didn't give a fuck about me. And to be completely honest, I didn't care. To anyone with a moral compass and sense of right and wrong, I would be considered a bad guy. Now I could tell you about how my dad was an abusive drunk, or about how I grew poor and was desperate for a better life. But that would probably give you the wrong impression. I didn't join the Pinkertons because they offered good pay and benefits, or out of some misguided belief that I could make something of myself. No, I joined those killers because I wanted to be a killer. I wanted nothing more out of life than to be tough and strong, and have people fear me. I didn't care that it made me the bad guy in other people's eyes. In fact, I wanted to be the bad guy. I truly wanted to be that evil bastard who enforced their will on the weak and powerless. Throughout my entire life, the bad guys were the ones who won, and I wanted to win by any means necessary. The therapist the Nishnade have me seeing tells me that the society of Earth failed to provide a proper developmental environment for me to mature as a balanced adult. And she may very well have a point. But I'm not the type of guy to blame other people or society as a whole for my actions. I knew what I was signing up for, and if anything, I was excited about it. I was 20 when I joined up, and I had been working as a security officer for the Pinkertons, a subsidiary of the Constellus Securitas Corporation, for almost 6 years by the time of the battle. During that time, I had infiltrated collectivization efforts, broke strikes, and got into quite a few firefights as part of my job. And that isn't even mentioning the black ops we were contracted for. Needless to say, my hands are soaked in blood, and I'm not even 30 years old. When the aliens showed up, I knew something crazy was going to happen, but I didn't know what exactly. I was a mercenary, a gun for hire, and I was very good at my job. Because of that, I knew my bosses and clientele quite well. So well that I knew they too would violently resist anything that could upset their bottom line. Even if I wasn't yet physically preparing, I was already mentally preparing. At first, there were just a few rumors about the aliens possibly siding with Marsgov and trying to take over Earth. But the higher-ups, the people over at Consec, didn't seem all too bothered. If anything, I bet you money that they thought they'd have a whole new list of well-paying clients. Even if these aliens didn't need mercs, I don't think anybody could have guessed who was right behind them. When we heard about the attack and seizure of the UHE headquarters, people started to get nervous. United Heavy Industries, the people who made space stations and military hardware, were hit so goddamn hard the company as whole looked like it was on the verge of collapse. They had hundreds of trillions in combined assets, produced some of the latest and greatest military technologies, and a small private army, and they were crippled in a single hit. I saw the leaked security footage of that attack while on an operation to disrupt a unionization effort at a copper mine in Michigan. Between the fire raining from the skies, the dozen mechanized walkers, and the twin dropships full of massive blue soldiers, the entire facility of 3,000 people surrendered in under 10 minutes. I gotta admit, that video made me start to sweat, and if I was sweating, I knew the higher-ups were sweating too. However, it seemed the idiots I worked for really thought they could stand a chance against these aliens. I mean, it was just the one big ship, some fancy weapons, and maybe a few escorts, right? Even if it was bigger than a new dawn, they couldn't be everywhere at once, and they could be overwhelmed. Or I should say, that was the impression I got from the orders I was receiving. I was in the middle of, well, let's just call it hostile negotiations with some of the union organizers when Mazer's message started playing. I can't lie to you, when I heard that AI's plea to humanity, it did affect me. But probably not in the way you're thinking. When our species was called on to be our best selves, to move past the horrors of our past and on towards better things, I got scared. I am a bad man. Some might even say I'm downright evil. I had spent the past few years of my life hurting people and, most importantly, I liked what I did. I didn't want to change, and neither did my employers. When I got the order to continue my mission and guarantee those lazy workers got back into that mine, I thought the higher-ups had a real plan. When I saw the Nishnab, those space Native Americans, show up at the workers' camp to provide aid. I started to realize things weren't going to work out how I wanted. When I got word from a messenger, an honest-to-God person hand-delivering a message, in the age of quantum communication, and saw the assault force show up to positively guarantee the end to this strike, I realized how dumb my employers really were. The Anishinaabe Confederacy, as it turns out, were the descendants of Native Americans who had been abducted from Earth over 1,000 years ago. When I saw their aid workers passing out food and blankets, I thought I was in some kind of alternative history science fiction movie, though some of them were wearing clothes that didn't look too different from the workers they passed out food and blankets to. Others were wearing armored exosuits that didn't even look real because they were so advanced. Though few of the patterns and color schemes looked familiar, all I could tell you was that they were humans with technology I couldn't believe and an aesthetic I hardly recognized. Now, I shouldn't have to explain how a group of people with access to faster-than-light space travel would probably have some pretty goddamn advanced technology. And most likely, some absurdly powerful weapons. However, it seems no one told the board of directors at Consec that. As I quickly learned, even if rich assholes watch other rich assholes fuck around and find out, they somehow think they'll be able to fuck around and get away with it. I was lucky that I was taking a dump in the woods when the rest of the assault force was taken out. We were setting up our mortars to hit the camp when I heard a few of those bloodthirsty bastards making jokes about taking scalps. I was gone for 5 minutes, heard an earth-shattering explosion, and came back to find nothing but a crater and pink mist still hanging in the air. After a minute or two of just standing there staring at where a dozen men had turned to vapor, I dropped my gun and just started running. It took me about 10 minutes to get back to our base, another 5 to set all of our intel on fire, and within about 5 hours, I was back at headquarters. I was driving at close to 100 miles per hour from Keweenaw back to Red Lake and didn't stop once. I had no idea what they hit us with, where it came from, or how they knew what we were about to do, but I didn't want to find out the hard way. By the time I had made it back to HQ, they were already preparing for whatever retaliation was coming. Anything that had a quantum or network link was disabled. All of our automated systems were replaced with hardwired analog systems, and they were bringing anti-air batteries out of storage that were older than my parents. What really seemed strange to me was the fact that they had mounted everything they had to vehicles and were driving everything around in random patterns across the base. We had over 5,000 security personnel, billions of Euro worth of hardware assets, and enough munitions to give a U.S. Marine Corps Expeditionary Force a run for their money. From high-intensity chemical lasers to hypersonic missiles and even old-school flak cannons, we had everything. Hell, they were even able to acquire 10 tactical nukes mounted on high-altitude, anti-air and satellite systems. When I saw those radioactive hazard warnings on a few of the missile trucks driving around, I was actually kind relieved. For the couple days leading up to the battle, I thought we were safe. Not only did we have men, munitions, and the home field advantage, we had nukes, whether or not the higher-ups had the balls to actually shoot those off. I genuinely believed that just the threat they posed would be enough to stop any attacks. I mean, nothing can take a 10-kiloton nuke to the face and survive, right? Well, as it turns out, if you're advanced enough to have faster-than-light travel, you probably also have shielding that can eat atomic fire like it's desert. When the warning sirens started blaring and the laser batteries stopped moving so they could fire, I was at one of the dug-in defensive positions near the main building on the base. About 100 meters away from me, one of those big-ass weapon trucks stopped. Its weird mirror thing pointed toward the sky, and I saw a flash through my polarized goggles. Then, just a few seconds later, the truck started to melt into a puddle of slag. All they did was stop for a few seconds, just long enough to accurately fire. But that was still more than enough time to be targeted and slagged. I'm not going to lie. Seeing those nuclear-tipped missiles start to streak through the sky actually made me think we might be able to win. After all, we were the bad guys, and the bad guys always won. It didn't matter how much we were bleeding. We were going to make them bleed more. When I saw the 10 flashes brighter than the noontime sun, I really thought we had been able to hit them back. Watching 12 balls of burning plasma searing against the balls of nuclear fire shattered any hope I had that I might survive. At first, they were faint against the lingering flash of the nukes, detonating somewhere between 80 and 100 kilometers in the air. But as they got closer and brighter, and the rest of our anti-air systems began lighting up, I couldn't help but stare. All I had on me were a rifle, a single-shot anti-tank guided missile, and an inch of ceramic polymer body armor. If 10 nukes couldn't stop what was coming for us, a gun and a man-portable rocket weren't going to do much. One of the other mercs in the defensive position with me had a pack of smokes, ones with a green cross on them, and started passing them around to anyone who wanted one. Of course, no one refused, because we all knew it could be our last chance. There were a few long minutes between the nuclear flashes and our doom, which we were going to fill with smoke. However, we got interrupted by one of the higher-ups trying to rally us. When they saw and smelled us all smoking, but with our weapons still in hand and still standing at the ready, they simply reassured us that everything was going to plan, and we should be ready to engage the enemy as per our orders. If we were going to die, everyone in that fighting hole wanted to do so on their own terms and go out swinging. I had stopped caring whether I lived or died years ago. In fact, I thought all of us had. That was just the nature of our line of work, to stop caring about life and death. All we really cared about was winning by any means necessary. We were bad guys after all, and that's what bad guys do. In the last few seconds before those crazy-ass mechs touched down, I just happened to be looking at just the right angle and at just the right time to see one of them release what looked like small drones that immediately disappeared. I thought I must have just been seeing shit until one of them decloaked just a few meters over my head once the battle was over. After those, an uncountable number of micro-missiles started launching out the arms and shoulders of the mechs before they were even on the ground. But what really spooked me weren't the ghost drones, missile hives, or metal monsters. It was sound as the remaining anti-air batteries were silenced. None of the mechs landed near me, so I couldn't tell you if they came down gracefully, fell like a falling stone, or didn't actually land at all and just hovered there. But I know what happened when an IFV, one of those big ones with the dual 20mm Gatling cannons, came tearing down a road towards my position. It was being chased down by a giant, headless metal man with a tomahawk longer than I, tall in one hand, and some kind of shield cannon combination in the other. When mech caught up, and the blade cleaved through that IFV like a hot knife through butter, I was truly terrified. I don't think I could ever properly describe the sound of metal simultaneously melting, tearing, and vaporizing, but I'll never forget it. I can still hear it if a room is quiet enough. The mech itself was almost completely silent as it pressed one foot on the front of the IFV, used its massive glowing shield to smack away the still-firing turret, and literally tore the vehicle in half with a single swing of its tomahawk. That was the sound of consequences, and it scared me more than anything I had ever experienced in my entire life. I didn't even bother to lift my AGM to fire at the machine. I just let it fall at my feet as I stood there. Besides the fact that the mech was moving faster than I would have been able to track, its wing-like thruster array had already launched it towards the next armored victim. Like a bat out of hell, I simply was frozen in place. For the first time in my life, I thought that maybe, just maybe, the bad guys didn't always win. What really cemented that was hearing the sound of running, as most of the other mercs in the defensive position with me lost their nerve and fled like scared children. The next few minutes were utter chaos, as explosions, gunfire, and screaming echoed throughout the forest that base was nestled in. I could have tried to pick up my weapons and fight back, but it would have been useless. By the time the explosions and gunfire had ceased, I was standing in the fighting hole with one other man, the one with the smokes, because all the others had already run away without firing a shot, or a shot being fired at our position. Despite all the death and destruction that surrounded me, it really did seem like those machines were only killing what they absolutely had to, and left everything else untouched. By the time it was all over, no more than about 15 minutes after the laser batteries fired the first shots, most of the surrounding forest looked unharmed. From the half-covered and reinforced position I was standing in, I could see at least 100 smoke trails rising above the seemingly pristine tree line. Since all of our communications gear had either been switched off or wasn't working, I had no idea how anyone else was faring. But if I'm being completely honest, I didn't really care. All I cared about was the fact that the fighting was over, and I was still alive. But we lost. The hardest thing I was struggling with in that moment wasn't the scope, scale, or speed of the battle. It was who had won. Sure, there were rumors of supposed re-education camps, and that sounded bad. But those were just rumors. The care these Nishnabes showed to the lowly copper miners, the message from Mazer, and the fact I was still alive all told me these were the good guys. These were the good guys, and yet they brutally slaughtered anything in their way. I couldn't reconcile those diametrically opposed facts, as hard as I tried. As it turned out, our base, the Pinkerton headquarters and training facility, was built on land that were stolen from a group of Native Americans who called themselves the Ojibwe, Chippewa, or Anishinaabe. If I had spent the time to learn that fact before, I might have seen the similarities between Anishinaabe and Nishnabे. If I had been that smart, I would have never even made that drive from Keweenaw to Red Lake. If I knew the Nishnabé had come back to find that squatters had violently removed their kin from their homes, and I was one of those squatters, I would have just surrendered right then and there. When they came home, they arrived with as much rage as they did love. I watched them feed the needy with as much vigor as they slaughtered tyrants, while I was just standing there in that fighting hole, utterly helpless and in shock. I felt weaker than I ever had in my entire life. The Nishnab genuinely seemed like good people, and yet I was frozen in fear. My pant leg was wet, and I could feel myself start to break down. As the seconds of silence turned to minutes, I heard the man next to me, the only other person who hadn't run, pull out his sidearm. I looked into his eyes and saw the same fear I felt in my soul. I knew what he was about to do, and the only thing that stopped him from putting that gun under his chin was a voice that called out to us. Directly above our heads that drone, I mentioned early uncloaked and pleaded in a synthetic, though genuinely compassionate voice. Please don't. It spoke with so much kindness that I can still feel the warmth in my soul. Anyone who does not engage in hostilities will be granted leniency. Please disarm yourselves and take a seat. Someone will be with you as soon as this location is secured to provide food, drink, and further instructions. There is a future for you, and it will be bright and wonderful. It was like a metal cherub, granting us mercy that we didn't deserve and had no choice but to accept. While we were sitting there, wading through the last of the pack, like it was our last chance, the guy with me brought up two paradoxes: the paradox of tolerance and the paradox of peace. To me, they seemed like the same basic concept, just applied in different ways. A society which is either too tolerant or too peaceful inevitably falls to another, which is less tolerant or less peaceful. While it seemed the Anishinaabe had that paradox of peace solved, especially considering how violently they reacted to violence, I was concerned about how much they would be willing to tolerate in terms of cultural differences. The next few days were a blur, and I don't think I could give you a cohesive timeline, even if I tried. But I do remember being handed translators almost immediately. There were medical checkups, orientation classes, paperwork, and lots of food. Hell, they even got me some beer when they found out I was Finnish and alcohol was a traditional part of my culture. Even though not even a week ago I was getting ready to drop mortars on their aid workers, I was now the one receiving aid. It was all so much that it still feels more like a dream than something that actually happened to me. When I got issued my punishment, I had the instinctual urge to fight it, because that's what bad guys do. We resist the consequences of our actions. However, when the details of that punishment were explained, I was almost excited. This didn't look so much like a punishment, but rather a job offer. 30 hours a week of assigned labor, 10 hours a week of classes, and a paycheck that was better than when I started at the Pinkertons. I thought it was a joke until I learned that it was 50% more labor than the average Anishinaabe worker, half their pay. And of course, they didn't need to take classes on things they already knew. If this is what good guys consider a punishment, then maybe we should have been letting them win this whole time. I'm only about 2 months into my 7-month sentence, but I can already feel something changing. I wouldn't call it brainwashing or forced indoctrination, but I am actually learning things in my classes, even though it all seems like stuff I already knew, or at least should have known. There's something refreshing about seeing the world through a new perspective. There aren't just good guys, people who are weak and can be taken advantage of, and bad guys, people who are strong and can take advantage over the weak. We're all individuals with different capabilities, unique talents, and a personal identity. The change I'm feeling isn't in who I am, but more in how I see the world. I don't think I'll ever be a good guy. With all the blood and suffering on my hands, I wouldn't feel comfortable with people looking at me like that. But I think I'm learning that making sure the good guys win is good for everyone. I'm still a bad guy, and I don't think that will ever change. However, I am going to make sure the good guys always win. Even if it kills me. Even if I have to do bad things. No matter what it takes, the good guys need to win. Even if the best I can be is still pretty bad, the least I can do is be bad for the right reasons. The Gardens of Deathworlders, Part 22. I'm impressed by how well you handled yourself, young man. War Chief Misko Pakwenish called out to Mick, while the Martian sat on the edge of his mech's open cockpit. You showed a surprising amount of restraint, and you should be proud of that. Honestly, I would have rather not killed anyone. Mick responded without turning to watch the war chief's mech come to a stop next to his own, the stogie still hanging from his mouth as he spoke. Though the number 47 was etched into his mind, that wasn't what was really bothering him. It's not my first time seeing combat, but it is my first time in God mode. It's like they never even stood a chance. God mode. The repeated English phrase came with a thick, though intelligible accent, just before the armor around Mesko's cockpit began to unfold. It's a video game thing. The Martian man tried to shake off what was on his mind as he waited for the Nishnab's cockpit to completely open to continue. It basically means being completely invulnerable to damage regardless of what your enemy throws at you. No wonder you and Tens get along so well. You're both gamer nerds. And your Debianbi are great, but they aren't completely invulnerable. The war chief's voice now came from the man rather than the machine as he pulled himself out of it and sat on the edge of the open cockpit just within arm's reach of the Martian. If we had been hit by a 100 megaton atomic instead of those 10 kiloton ones, we might have been in real trouble. Nah, something that big would have taken out half the state. There was now a slight smile peeking through Mick's thick beard, even though he was still staring straight ahead while passing the rolled smoke. The U.S. ain't stupid enough to give Mercs anything real spicy. Nesko let his legs casually dangle off the edge of the unfolded cockpit armor he was sitting on while he reached over and plucked the smoldering, sweet-smelling special cigar from Mick's mechanical hand. It had been just over 2 hours since the strike had initiated, and the battle was completely over. Despite being opposed by over 100 IFVs and tanks, and over 5,000 security personnel on site, the dozen light assault mechanized walkers had utterly eliminated all major threats within the first 20 minutes. No more than 10 minutes later, the second and far larger wave of less spectacular, but still impressive mechanized walkers had made landfall and were fanning out to clear out the stragglers. By the end of the first hour and beginning of the second hour, troop carrier dropships were already landing and disgorging hundreds of fully armed and armored infantry to sweep the buildings and bunkers on the base. After an hour and a half, the surviving 3,000 Pinkertons were being rounded up and collected near the main building for processing. With their job now well and done, each of the first wave pilots were coming down from their adrenaline rush and trying to process what they had just done in their own way. What do you mean by that? Nesko finally asked after releasing a thick cloud of smoke. You think the local government gave those mercenaries atomic weapons? Why? I know the colonizers gave them merc snooks. Consec ain't supposed to be nuclear capable, at least as far as Mars Gavier knows. Mick had a somewhat disgruntled look on his face while he continued staring straight ahead. Only a few govs in court have nukes, and Consec just ain't one of them. They're union busters and black book operators, not arms manufacturers. But why? Why would... To gauge your capabilities and try to develop countermeasures. While still staring at him, Mick cut the war chief off with a tone that implied that this should already be known. The U.S. hates it when someone has better toys than they do. And now, there have been 2 attacks on us soil that they've been completely unable to prevent or respond to. That's so fucking stupid. Mesko countered with a look of disdain on his face, before taking another deep puff off the cigar and passing it back to Mick before elaborating. We know the Sol system isn't anywhere near galactic standards yet. Y'all need a lot of technological education. We even send every government in this entire system our full military capacities and the capabilities of our allies. It was meant to help them feel safe knowing they had friends out there to watch their backs while they stretched their wings. If they really did give these mercenaries those atomics, I am going to be fucking furious. To be fair, it could have been the Russians, Chinese, or even a few core, like UIA. If I'm being honest, the Americans aren't the only idiots dumb enough to try that shit. Mick paused for a moment to take an almost painfully long and deep drag off the cigar, and continued, while smooth smoke poured out of his mouth. But, considering we just ate 10 tactical nukes like they were candy, I'm just concerned about what we're going to be tested with next. Mikhail, my friend, we do tolerate violence, especially from members of our own species. The surprisingly compassionate way Misko made that statement snapped Mick out of his daze and caused him to lock eyes with the war chief. The galaxy has enough problems without our species causing more. There are truly terrible evil beings out there. Entire civilizations founded on slavery, cannibalism, and greed. And we will not allow our own species to become one of them. I mean, when you put it like that, though the Martian could tell the war chief hadn't meant that as a threat, it almost felt like one. After taking a deep but not quite painful drag off the special cigar, he passed it back and continued. Give humanity something to unify behind, some kind of challenge or enemy, and we'll find a way to get along. Space exploration did that for a while, and maybe it can do it again. Oh, there are far too many battles that need to be fought, and even more far-off places to explore. Misko took the cigar and examined the smoldering cherry for a moment before taking a contemplative puff. We would rather have more friends to see the stars alongside, and allies help us fight the horrors, than more enemies to wage war against. Well, at least, ya got Marskov. Mick chuckled lightly as he went back to staring into the forest in front of him. I think this is the first time in about 20 years that we've had a consensus between every station, colony, and tribal government. I hear they're even planning some kind of parade in Payatawawao. How do you have a parade on an airless? The war chief was cut off by a voice coming from his cockpit. War chief, incoming message from the War Council. The war chief's bonded control AI called out to him with an almost mechanical voice. Message reads, the commanding officer of the United States Army. One General Robert Andrews has requested an emergency meeting and access to the target location to negotiate for the release of us citizens. An escorted convoy is on approach to the target location now, and will be there within the hour. Network sensors are detecting a small group of lightly armed and armored atmospheric vehicles, designated AMV-7s, approaching from the southeast. Wait, I heard Axika already put that shithead in his place. Mick blurted out with a deep laugh. Something about him trying mouth off to her, and her laying down the law. Yeah, she sent me a brief on that. Misko responded with a hearty laugh of his own. I'm telling you, I would not want to piss that woman off. She's in the top 3 scariest women I know. Who are the other 2? Mick asked, while leaning over to hand past the stogie. Tense's grandmother and my wife. The war chief reached over, while a particular smirk formed on his face, before he snapped the cigar from Mick's hand and leaned back into his cockpit. But speaking of wives, Posebi, contact the diplomatic team. I'm gonna need neutral political and legal experts here for this. Uh, A. We have visual contacts at R12. The AMV pilot alerted through the intercom. They're not showing up on radar, but I can see two of them on the visual feeds. Interceptors. The general shouted back. Are they targeting us? I can't tell, sir. The answer came with an almost shaking voice. They spit it out, pilot. They're shaped like men, sir. And they're just hovering there. The pilot's voice was noticeably scared now. Wait. I'm receiving a radio transmission. Putting it through now. General Andrews of the United States Army. The obviously translated voice of a young woman came through the general's headset. What is the meaning of this? General Andrews' voice was incredibly perturbed. I will take your indignancy as a yes. The voice now sounded quite annoyed. Orders from the war chief. We are here to escort you to the Red Lake occupied zone and ensure your safety en route. Who do you think you are to talk to me like? I think I'm a woman who just killed 300 enemy combatants in under 10 minutes. The tone that came through the speakers in the general's headset sent a shiver down his spine. Do not make me add to my count. There was a silence in the cabin of the aircraft as the general's security personnel stared at him, and he stared at the space in front of him. Regardless of how the man wanted to start this interaction, he was now on the back foot, and he knew it. No amount of false bravado, weak shows of strength, or orders from the president could calm the sense of impending doom he now felt in his soul. The threat he had just received was so blunt yet dismissive that it almost felt to the general like he was being scolded more than anything else. Though the seething, impotent rage on General Andrews' face forced his security detail to retain their composure and not let their fears slip through. Even the general couldn't stop himself from starting to sweat. They're entering formation with us, sir. The voice of the pilot called out through the intercom before the translated voice popped back in. And projecting some kind of field. Like I said, we are here to safely escort you to the occupied zone. Despite lightening up a bit, Nishne Mech pilot's voice was still noticeably annoyed. We have received intelligence that our target recently acquired their atomic weapons from a third party. We have not been able to verify the identity of this third party, nor their motives. So we are simply taking extra precautions for your safety and our own. Pilot! The general barked. I already closed the radio transmission, sir. The sound of the pilot scrambling with his computer controls could be heard over his panicked reply in the intercom. You thought you closed it. The feminine voice scoffed through the supposedly secure and closed network communication system. Pilot. This shout was even more angry than the last. I'm trying. Tapping and clicking sounds were even more audible over the pilot's suddenly irked tone. It's like I had no control over any of the systems. Everything I'm doing is instantly being undone, sir. Your encryptions are well below galactic standards, and you lack any real active shielding. The Nishne-eyed woman's voice almost sounded like it was laughing now. Y'all got a long way to go before, and a lot to learn before you'd become more than an annoyance to us. Nuclear weapons are an annoyance to you? The general couldn't stop himself from making the snide retort. 10 kiloton yields? Yes. The slight laugh In the reply suddenly became serious as the translated taunt continued. But if you stepped it up to 10 megatons, you might be able to dent our shields. Though we would be pissed if we had to clean up the contamination from something like that. It might take us a whole week. What do you mean by clean up? Though General Andrews had been briefed on various facets of the Anishinaabe capabilities, he was starting to realize how much that brief was lacking. Are you implying you can just clean up radioactive contamination in a week? Yeah, I think so. The translated voice suddenly sounded far less self-assured than before, and almost reminded General Andrews of his niece for a moment. I'm an operator, not a contamination specialist, so I couldn't really tell you any details. But you can just look it up on the web, though. Just gotta download the app. The wrinkled and gruff general mumbled to himself as he pulled out both his personal smartphone and reading glasses. Despite his brief failing to detail certain capabilities he would have very much liked to know about, his assistants had included the fact that the majority of the information they had access to came from the Anishinaabe themselves through their form of the Internet. Having been far too busy trying to wrangle the bureaucratic and political cats during this crisis, he hadn't taken the time to personally investigate this wealth of knowledge, and he now regretted it. After loading into the rather simplistic app and being greeted by name, all he had to do was type in radioactive decontamination to the search function. And he received a variety of links to the Environmental Protections and Restoration Council with race, the exact information he wanted. With a mildly satisfied huff and screen devoid of annoying ads or clickbait titles, he clicked the first link and began scrolling through the cleanly laid out documents. Quickly skimming through the information, it read like science fiction crossed with a boring press release. In the back of the general's mind, he was debating whether this was the best Potemkin propaganda he had ever seen, or an example he should give to his assistants on how to write a proper briefing. It was all short, to-the-point statements about manipulating the gravitational and weak force fields to attract, absorb, and contain ionizing forms of radiation. The steps to take if exposed to a radiological source, and which government entities to contact if contaminated material was discovered. Following a link in that last section and starting to fall down a rabbit hole, he soon found himself looking at a list of active contamination sites, including one labeled Red Lake Occupied Zone and the working personnel. As the general stopped and stared at the information he was now viewing, he couldn't shake the feeling he was being played. "Pilot, are you still on this line?" the general asked with a light hint of hesitation. "Sir?" How?" The AMV pilot interjected. "Not you, the mech pilot." The scalding retort instantly shut up the U.S. Army pilot as a light giggle came through the intercom. "Oh, yeah, I'm here," the woman's voice responded. "What's up? Is the information on your web accurate?" Though there was still a vague bravado in his tone, the general was starting to sound more genuine. "I really hope so." The answer came with dismissive laughter. "We don't really censor or distort information on the web, if that's what you're asking. The worst you'll see is redactions for classified material. You really expect me to believe I can find the social media profiles of the decontamination team at Red Lake just by clicking a few links on your official government website?" Unlike everything that had previously come out the general's mouth, this question actually sounded sincere. "That seems a bit too personal." "Well, yeah. The pilot's tone made it clear she didn't see any security issues with that. Anyone who works for our government has their profile viewable by our community members. It's really helpful if you want to get into a particular field or ask questions about how your taxes are being spent. You can even find mine if you look up Helldiver Regiment 2649. General Andrews and a few of his security guards couldn't help themselves. They all had to know. Considering how well they had held their composure so far, the grizzled old general couldn't help but cut the young soldiers a bit of slack on this one. Though they all had heard the young woman's voice and knew that she was a warrior who could kill them all in a moment's notice, they all wanted to know what she looked like. With just a few clicks, every man in that cabin was now staring at the smiling face of a young woman posing next to a large dark purple and iridescent blue avian. The woman's sharp features, high cheekbones, and rainbow eyes and chin tattoos made her look like an exotic model to the American men staring at their phones. Despite all of them having seen beautiful Native American women before, though mostly in Martian-based media, none were expecting a warrior who could end their lives to look the way she did. Chasing Rainbow? The general asked, in a genuinely pleasant manner, while reading the smaller translated version of the woman's name on her profile. Minashka in Wagon Tien. Oh, I said no. The woman corrected slowly, though in an equally pleasant tone. We don't usually translate people's names unless we literally can't pronounce them. It would be like if I called you. There was a pause, and General Robert Andrews knew exactly where this was going before he heard the woman's voice return with a giggle. It would be like if I called you bright, Fane, manly. Fair enough. Andrews rolled his eyes as he thought back to an old college roommate who made the same joke. And, my apologies, Menashka Jiwa General. He pronounced the name deliberately to try to get it right. I'm impressed. You can be polite. The woman's voice almost sounded friendly as she tried to make a joke with the man. But I go by Nashka. It's easier for other species who can't speak Nishnabemwen to pronounce. Other species. Like the one in your profile picture. Yeah, that's Binko. He's a she-croak, and his wife, Tarky, is a Coco. Nashka did her best to mimic the clicks and pops of the different croak subspecies. Tarky is actually on the diplomatic team you're meeting with. Does she look like a giant purple crow too? Andrews let out with a chuckle as he zoomed on the strange bird on his screen. No, she looks like an eagle. That response actually made the man's eyes widen slightly before he started to look on the screen for a link to the birdman's profile. A bald eagle? The general was now imagining a full sapient, and quite large, incarnation of his proud nation's symbol of liberty and freedom. Nah, a golden eagle, the woman's answer slightly disappointed the man, as he found a link labeled Binko H. Schlin and saw a picture of the purple bird and his golden wife in flight together. Our word for all eagles and golden eagles is the same. No. Then, bald eagle is Peshno. That actually makes a lot of sense. Andrews was surprisingly satisfied with that honest and straightforward explanation. Really? Well, yes. Young bald eagles look very much like golden eagles until they're a few years old. The general suddenly had the suspicion he was being played again. However, before he could let his tone drop to signal that he thought she should already know that, Nashka nearly shouted through his headset. Wait, you've seen real eagles before? Do they still exist? The wonder in the young woman's voice instantly cut through any doubt in the grizzled mind of the general. Even though this woman could kill him at the blink of any eye, she was on a planet her people hadn't seen in 1,200 years. And the man was finally realizing what that meant. Absolutely. Neither I nor any other self-respecting military officer of these United States would allow our country's symbol of freedom to die out. General Andrews noticed a slight but respectful smile of approval on the face of a young corporal in his security detail. Our government has had to make a lot of compromises with the corporations over the years, but the protected status of eagles isn't one of them. Your government actually protects eagles? There was obvious disbelief in Nashka's reply. That is one of the few things that all of the Joint Chiefs and I all agree on. Andrews actually sounded quite proud of himself. If our symbol of freedom can't fly free, we would lose something fundamental about this country. Sure, we'd probably take a hit in morale and recruiting, but it would be something far worse than that. If you understand what I mean. I think the war chief is gonna like you. Nashka hesitated slightly before adding, well, assuming you aren't the one who gave those idiot mercs the nukes. I would never. The general was clearly offended by the accusation, and his grumbly tone was starting to come back. Even if the president ordered me to use nuclear weapons in the defense of this country, I wouldn't trust some mercenaries to execute that order. Who would suggest something so heinous? Mick said it was likely a government was trying to test us, to develop countermeasures, and Mazur verified that Consec shouldn't have had those weapons. The woman's tone was still friendly, though becoming slightly defensive. However, the mention of that name caused the general's eyes to go wide. But he did mention it. It could have been several different governments or corporations. Considering how honest and open he has been with us, we are inclined to believe him. Wait, are you talking about that Martian professor? General Andrews asked, before remembering the man's full name from a brief a few days ago. Dr. Mikhail T. Oring. River? Hold on. Nashka paused for a moment, and the general heard a soft beep in his headset. Hey, Mick, are you a doctor? I have 2 PhDs in theoretical physics, so I'm a philosophical doctor, not a medical doctor. A new masculine voice entered the general's headset and answered the question with the tone of a confused academic. Why do you ask? Oh, the general called you a doctor, and I almost didn't believe him. Doctor? River? The general interjected. Yup. Rah. Cherries? Yep. That you, General Andrews? Mick shot back through the audio-only link with a sarcastically jovial tone. Coming to inspect your opposition firsthand, yeah, tyrant? No. You anarchist? I need to verify that American citizens aren't being tortured or mistreated. The general didn't bother dropping his tone or getting angry with a man who was obviously trying to incense him. Just shot back an equally sarcastic quip. And I was hoping to negotiate for their release into our custody. But I must ask you, were you serious about the deal you offered my government? You receive a shitload of space money, and I receive some goddamn peace deal? The Martian was still somewhat sarcastic, but was clearly shifting towards a more honest, if amused, tone. Yeah, I'm dead serious about that. I'm tired of the bullshit, and I want to feel safe seeing the galaxy. We got planets to explore and real bad guys to fight. Can't do that if our governments are still bickering like